Since I did a retrospective on the Halloween episodes, it's time for the Christmas ones, even if this video is very late. Plus, it's also been 10 years since I started doing them. Normally I have plenty of time to plan out the Halloween episodes, while November is always the main month I plan out the Christmas-themed episodes. Which can be quite the challenge when trying to balance that and the holiday seasons going on. Unlike the Halloween specials, where I always had plenty of topics to choose from, the Christmas specials always felt like a challenge. Basically, the thought process for this was, what Christmas special is rarely seen on TV? And after googling some ideas, I managed to make enough of them for the past 10 years. A Tin Toy Christmas. Not much to say about this one, since there really isn't that much info about it. But it was a nice starting point in making the first Christmas-themed special for Forgotten Media. I remember hearing about it from the Making of Toy Story on one of their DVDs when they discussed about the idea about making a feature-length film of their character Tinny from the Tin Toy short. What I didn't know at the time was that one of the ideas would have been more of a Christmas-themed special. But of course the idea was scrapped in favor of doing Toy Story instead. A Christmas Carol of the 1900s. This is one of my personal favorites, where I got to cover some of the earliest film adaptations of A Christmas Carol. I kind of focused more on making this one more of an educational episode, where I talked about some of the basics of doing silent films and all that, as I hadn't seen that many vids on YouTube talking about that kind of stuff. I was going to cover 3 versions, but I had no luck in finding the 1908 version, so I just stuck to the 1901 version and the 1910 version, with some brief mentionings of the other versions that happened during the 1900s. Although I'm not quite sure if most of them are real or not, back then all I had to work with was Wikipedia and maybe IMDb, so there is a chance that some of those details aren't that reliable. Either way, it was nice to compare and contrast these 2 versions and figure out which one I liked better. K9 and Company. After the Christmas Carol episode, I tried doing another Christmas special in the same year, similar to what I used to do with the Halloween specials. I picked out K9 and Company just for those few points that I mentioned in the video where it's not really Christmas themed, but it takes place around the holidays. Looking back, it's one of my least favorite episodes, mainly because of the fact that there are times where I'm constantly switching between talking normally and trying to talk with a British accent. I guess I was trying to be all cute and all, but it just comes off as being very embarrassing. My apologies to any of the British people who have had the misfortune of watching that episode. Still, it's an interesting time capsule for me, as this was back in the day when I was still brand new to the Doctor Who franchise, and I didn't know much about its very lengthy history. This was also around the time I developed the alternate opening with the whole, where I dig up some stuff on the Island of Forgotten Christmas specials. There would be other different versions of the intro, whether I was still experimenting or just forgot the others over time, but this was always the more common one. The Adventures of the Wrong Santa Claus. To start off, yes, I spelled Claus wrong for the title card since there's no E in Santa Claus. I guess I just had the film The Santa Claus on my mind when I was making this. Honestly, I felt like covering this one mostly because the name caught my attention, even if it is just a short silent film. Yeah, not much to say about this one. It's definitely one of the more shorter episodes to Forgotten Media. Then again, this was the first time I got to try out at making the live-action bits look more Christmassy. The figures of Jack and Santa are actually sitting on some Christmas-themed popcorn tins, but since I was on a couch in between them, it did make things a little uncomfortable and uneven, especially when the Jack figure kept falling off constantly. The Magic Christmas Tree. Normally, I tend to avoid covering bad stuff since that kind of content is very oversaturated. But sometimes I might pick out a few to look at. Then, and I just didn't want to join in the whole trend of like, oh, people being the next AVGN or Nostalgia Critic where they're constantly yelling all the time. Yeah, that wasn't really my thing. This special is an example on just how weird it is. Like, it's a Christmas film with a witch, a giant, a talking wish-granting tree, an annoying lawnmower, and other things going on. I felt like this would be a good laugh. I think I was mostly inspired by some of James Rolfe's old videos where he covers some really obscure Christmas specials, like, Santa and the Ice Cream Bunny and whatnot. If you saw the outtakes video, then you'll know that the Jack figure was not cooperating with me in this episode. It kept falling over so many times that I later got so fed up that I just grabbed some scotch tape and taped him onto the tin there. Which, yeah, most of the time he's okay, he's standing up on its own, but near the end of the video you can clearly see there's tape around the base of his legs. I was definitely on more of a time crunch with this episode and didn't have that much time to re-record scenes. trying to film the live action bits, all while my parents were getting things organized and ready to drive over to visit relatives for the holidays, so you might hear some creaking noises in the background. Because of the stress from the holidays and personal life, this was the last time I would do 2 Christmas-themed episodes, and only focus on doing 1 every year, just like what I did with the Halloween specials. The Nightmare Before Christmas Tiger Electronic game. Another one of my personal favorites, and an interesting process of making this episode, as there was barely any other videos that talked about this thing. I was surprised to find this online, can't remember if it was from eBay or Amazon, and I was even more surprised to see that it was still sealed up in its package. I always script my episodes for Forgotten Media, but this time I decided to have this episode feel more like an unboxing video showing off almost every detail about this cheaply made handheld game. I did the intro and showed off the game and its package like I normally do, but once it cuts to the chair and the more close-ups of the handheld itself, then the rest of the video is entirely unscripted. And then of course there was the challenge of trying to record the gameplay. Funny enough, there would exist emulators for certain Tiger Electronic games much later, and I have seen one for the Nightmare Before Christmas one. So now there exists better quality gameplay footage of that particular game. The Little Drummer Boy Book 2. Not much to say about this episode. I just felt like going through Rankin and Bass's library of Christmas specials that they made, and looked for one that isn't talked about very much. I did watch the Little Drummer Boy special before going into this, and yeah, sequel wasn't that great. But I now have a better appreciation for the first film. When I started to record the live-action bits in my old room, I lost the ability to have the Christmas stuff in the background, so I just pulled out my old Christmas tree and placed it next to me to try and give it that festive feeling. The bonus bit at the end where I show off the full view of the Christmas tree, and my sister's cat making a cameo, does show off most of the behind-the-scenes stuff that happens when doing those episodes in the old room. Having something to sit on, the script being printed out next to me, and of course a bottle of water close by whenever my throat gets dry from doing so many takes. Hoops and Yo-Yo Ruin Christmas. Now, this was a nostalgic episode to do, since I remembered Hoops and Yo-Yo's popularity back in the day, and I was excited back then to hear about the Christmas special that they did when it first aired. Later on, I was surprised to see that no one has ever reviewed this film on YouTube, so after hunting down a DVD copy, I got to have some fun covering it for Forgotten Media. I started off with a history lesson where I covered a good chunk of the characters and their cards and all that. It was nice to find those old animations and watch them again when working on this episode. There's a segment in the video where I briefly talk about planning to do an episode related to Mega Man, and sadly I haven't gotten around to that yet. I'm pretty sure what I had in mind was covering the short-lived Dreamwave Mega Man comics. I have all 4 issues, just haven't gotten around to doing it yet. Nutcracker Fantasy. Yeah, 2018 was a terrible year for Forgotten Media, where all I could do was just the holiday specials. During that same year, Nutcracker in the Four Realms was already released in theaters, so that's when I decided to do something related to the Nutcracker for Forgotten Media. After looking through various film adaptations, Nutcracker Fantasy really caught my attention, like, oh, Christopher Lee's in this film, oh, this looks like a Rankin Bass film, there's an original and a remastered version, and so on and so on. I haven't seen that many film adaptations of the Nutcracker, but this one really surprised me, even if the whole deal with Clara and Fitz is rather questionable. I also got to have some fun in talking about the 1973 adaptation. I discovered this when working on Nutcracker Fantasy, and since it was short, I decided to throw this in as a bonus. This was sort of my way for apologizing on the lack of episodes that year. Also, the Nutcracker that I feature in that particular episode is actually my first Nutcracker that I've had for a long time. Jingle All The Way, the 2011 film. Much like Hoops and Yo-Yo Ruin Christmas, this was another film I remembered watching on the Hallmark Channel, and I was surprised that no one has ever reviewed it on YouTube. Mostly because whenever people say, that Jingle All The Way movie, they're always talking about the Arnold Schwarzenegger film. And that became the gag in the title card, where I'm holding the husky Jingle, and Arnold's character from the other Jingle All The Way film is all confused like, what? There's another Jingle All The Way film? When researching this topic, I was surprised to hear that there was a sequel, so I got a DVD double pack that had both films, and it was a nice experience, rewatching a film I saw a couple years ago, and watching another film for the first time. This was an episode where I got to have some fun in exaggerating my love for husky puppies, where I pretended that my heart stops from an overload of cuteness, and after a while I have to get myself drunk just to get through the video. And before you ask, no, I'm not actually drunk during that gag, that was all acting. Still, it was quite the process. Whenever I do those falls of my heart stopping and all that, I had a bunch of pillows and blankets off to the side so that I'd fall on it. And a good thing too, because otherwise I'd be suffering a concussion from the hard floor. The bottle that I'm holding is a wine bottle or something that was in my parents' garage next to a bunch of stuff ready to be sent off to the recycling center. I just took it from the pile, washed the inside of the bottle with soap and water, and used it as a prop for the drunk bit. In fact, the gag with the ending where I accidentally hold it up wasn't in the script. After I finished recording all the drunk bits, I was like, hey, maybe I can bring this bottle back in for the ending for one more gag. When doing the voice of being drunk, the main inspiration for that was from a Pink Panther cartoon called Pickled Pink, where Mel Blanc voices a drunk character who invites the Pink Panther into his house. So I modeled the drunk voice more off of that exaggerated slurring voice that he did in that cartoon. And of course, this is also the episode where apparently I forgot how to spell hospital, and instead I kept typing in hospitable in the title card gags. One Magic Christmas. Man, 2020 was a nightmare to get through in December. Not just because of my declining mental health during the whole COVID-19 pandemic, but while I was working on Forgotten Media, I was also busy with the daily advent calendar videos, while being super busy with my current job. It was neat to discover that the film's name was something that I've heard of in the past, even if after all these years, the film was pretty bland for the most part. I'm not too happy about how this episode came out. I feel like I sound very tired most of the time. Yeah, and since this was 2020, where I was being paranoid and keeping myself in self-isolation during the whole pandemic, you'll notice that this is the only time on Forgotten Media where I'm rocking that mullet look. The Nightmare Before Christmas, Zero's Journey. Not only was this the first Christmas-themed episode with the new style, but this was also the first episode made in Adobe Premiere, which is my current video editing program. Since I was still new to Premiere at the time, the first thing I did was doing the intro where I decided to do a spoof of the opening of the movie, discovering that I had more freedom to move pictures around on screen, unlike an iMovie, figuring out the video and audio tracks, and designing the hinterlands and the trees that represent certain YouTubers that I follow. I asked my friend Luke the Fox if he'd be interested in doing the narrator. I just told him I needed something that sounded like Patrick Stewart or Christopher Lee. And I'm pretty happy with how this intro came out, and the same deal with the rest of the episode. This was another topic I've heard about and surprised not a lot of people to talk about it. And since the comic/manga series was finished, I figured now was a good time to fully review this topic and provide my thoughts on how I think this is the better sequel to the movie, and not Oogie's Revenge. And that concludes another retrospective on the holidays. I still have plans of doing more Christmas episodes in the future. In fact, after Christmas of 2022, I recently bought a DVD copy of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and the Island of Misfit Toys. Yeah, that forgotten sequel to Rankin Bass's Rudolph classic. I've had some other ideas, like covering Olive the Other Reindeer. Feels like that's another film that's fallen into obscurity. And I'm sure there are other ideas that would work for Christmas-themed episodes. I've had some ideas on making an episode that's either a spoof of A Christmas Carol or How the Grinch Stole Christmas. I've been leaning more towards the Grinch idea, like I'm the grumpy old Grinch character next to a town who loves things that are trendy and current, so I steal all their stuff and replace it with forgotten and lesser-known things, thinking that I'll ruin their Christmas with things that they don't care about. I'll have to tinker around with this idea more, as I don't want this to end up becoming more of a ripoff of the AVGN's parody of the Grinch. But yeah, that's about it for this video, so I'll see you next time.